looking down the road, just like I always do.
Well, good morning, Matrix. How you all doing out there? Thank you for checking out my channel once again. My name is Philip, and I run this channel, The Inner Road, and you're joining me today on my commute to work. I am taking a long way, as I always do, to work. There are, as you can see, is morning traffic in Charlottesville, Virginia. What else would you expect? I've shaken up the route a little bit today, although I basically only have two ways that I go. As I've said before, check out episode 1. I live 0.6 miles from where I work, but I commute 22 miles to get there because I choose to, because I love riding this bike. I love the country winding roads that we have here in Charlottesville, and it just brings me joy. It's a great way to start the morning. So I want to talk today. I've gotten to know a neighbor of mine in my apartment complex, a lovely woman named Becky. She's a nurse toward the end of her career. She's doing a lot of work with people who are facing the end of their life. That's the kind of nursing she's doing. The end of life care is vitally important. She's doing good work. And we've gotten just, we had that kind of like apartment complex chatting in the parking lot kind of relationship. Oftentimes at the end of the day when we're both exhausted from work. Look at this beautiful area of Virginia I live in. So, she has said to me before about the motorcycle, seeing me often gearing up or just getting off the bike after a ride. Aren't you afraid? And the other day we were talking, and she just walked up to me as I was about to throw my leg over, all geared up, ready to go. I was just about to put my helmet on, actually. And she put her hand on my shoulder, and she said, you're crazy, right? And no, I wanted to diffuse the moment for a bit, just kind of my nature. I said, well, I'm a psychologist, so I think we're all a little crazy. But I got to thinking about it, and this is a pretty classic way of responding to things that scare us, right? I mean, is to assume that someone else is crazy, or they must be afraid, and all they're really doing, all they're really saying when they say these things is that they're afraid. They would be afraid to ride a motorcycle. And don't get me wrong, I get it. I mean, I have said to people who have, jumped out of airplanes with parachutes that you're crazy, right? Or that, aren't you afraid? Because to me, that's not something I want to do. I've got people in my family who've done it. I've got friends who did it. And it is just not for me. I have no desire to get up in a plane thousands of feet in the air and then jump out, either in tandem or I'm solo. So I get it. I've said the same thing. You're crazy, or aren't you afraid? And all I was really doing was expressing my fear and how I think it's crazy for me to. But of course, this whole issue of fear and leaning into fear or running from fear, facing fear. As I said in episode 1, I hope you check it out, Scratching the Itch. I've spent my entire professional life as a research psychologist studying probably what I would consider to be one of the ultimate fears that virtually most, I would say most, human beings on this planet face. And that is the fear of death. The fear that we know we're going to die. And that's been my career, publishing, researching. I've developed a model to try to understand it and to explain how human beings can overcome that fear. And if they can, if you're not overcome it, you're never going to be rid of it entirely, but at least how we can confront it and lean into it, right? And live a life that isn't sort of controlled by that fear. and that we can take some of that control back. That's been my work, and we'll talk about that. But the thing about fear of death is it's, people say, I fear death, but when you study fear of death, what you discover early on is that it's much more complicated than saying that. There are all different kinds of ways that people fear death. As strange as that might sound, because you think of death often, and we often do, as just this sort of binary on-off switch, and that's what it is that people fear. But really, it's a multifaceted fear. It is a fear that is, there are people who fear the dying process only. There are people who fear, like a very common one, maybe it's true for you, the unknown, right? Like, what's going to happen when I die? The dying process is often accompanied with pain and distress, and that's what people fear. There's a specific fear of the dead. There are people who don't think of dying so much in terms of how it will be for them, but they can't be around anything dead. Animals, humans, they won't go to a funeral or a wake, etc. And there are even more facets than that. And I guess what I'm just trying to say is human beings have a complex relationship with death, as it probably ought to be. So if you want to get to the core of the matter in terms of like getting on this bike and taking control of my life, again, it wasn't really driven, I wasn't afraid to ride a motorcycle, but in terms of what overcoming or at least facing your fear of death can do for you, let me just briefly tell you a little bit about what psychology. Again, I don't want to be lecturing here as an academic, although that's what my career has been. I do want to give you a little bit of background. So there's a very well-known, well-established theory in psychology called terror management theory. So terror management theory. It's a theory of how human beings manage their terror of death. It's right there in the title. As all good titles should be, they should explain pretty much what's going on. Now, broadly speaking, terror management theory comes from the thinking and writing of cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker in the 70s, who talked about how human beings must deny death. There's no other way to get through life except to deny the fact that we're going to die. He wrote a great book called, guess what? The Denial of Death. And it's in this denial that we are capable of getting past our terror, and it's the reason he would argue, and other terror management psychologists would say, that we're not curled up in a corner in a ball of tears faced with our mortality. It's that we manage it by denying it and not confronting it, not owning it, but by just trying to run away from it as best as possible. Now, terror management has done a lot more than just express that part of it. It's actually done a great job of showing how it controls us. So very briefly, the notion here is that, again, it's more complicated than this, but I'm going to try and be brief. We fear death. It terrorizes us. So we invest as human beings in social constructions, ideas that are immortal, right? And we call those cultural worldviews. Now, a classic cultural worldview is religion. It doesn't make religion bad. It doesn't mean it's meaningless. None of that. It's just, it ticks all the boxes, if you will, of what a worldview is. It promises literal immortality, most of them, not all. And it allows you to develop a sense of meaning and esteem, right? Because it doesn't feel good to know that we're going to die and potentially be no different from a potato in the ground someday. That doesn't fill us with self-esteem. So if we are a good Christian, a good Muslim, a good Jew, and we go and do all the things that we're supposed to do, and we live up to the expectations, we can, extract a sense of meaning in that. But there are other worldviews. There's ideologies, politics, values, even having a family, being a good father, being a good husband, being a good wife. These things allow you to, guess what, extract value and meaning, to say that I'm a good person. I'm not meaningless like a potato in the ground. Now, that's all great, and there's no necessarily inherent problem with that, but the issue becomes that once you start relying on these worldviews to save you from this existential terror that you're facing, any threat to that worldview is a severe threat. It's an existential threat. It's one that you have to confront, right? Because if you're holding on to a particular religion, let's say, as the answer to your existential dread, and someone comes along, right? It's saving you. You're floating in a water too deep, and you're afraid you're going to drown, and then suddenly someone throws you this life raft, which is a religion that you buy into, and it saves you, and you feel like, okay, I'm not going to drown today because I've got this life raft of my religion. And then someone else comes by on a boat, in this metaphor, and says, hey, dude, that life preserver that you're holding on to, that religion, it's bullshit. It's not real. Or my religion is the real one, yours isn't. I don't know what you're holding on to. Suddenly, you have a choice, right? You've at least two choices. The first choice is that you can just accept that person's statement and let go of the life preserver, or realize it wasn't really there all along, and suddenly you're drowning again, and that doesn't feel very good. Or you could take that life preserver that you're holding on to desperately, and you can start beating that other person to death with it. Right? Because, and unfortunately, terror management theory shows that that's what we do. Why? Because we need that worldview. It's serving an incredible purpose for us. It's helping us face our existential terror. So if someone comes along and says that worldview of yours is meaningless, it's bunk, well, you're going to have no other choice potentially but to aggress against that person's worldview. And this is, of course, why terror management argues we have ideological and cultural intergroup conflict, right? Religious arguments and fights, political, ideological fights, etc. It's because at the core, it is individuals confronting threats to their worldview life preservers. Now, I'll end here with terror management theory to say this is where my idea really takes shape, which is that the one thing that you need to see in all this isn't just that, isn't just the intergroup terror component of it, or the intergroup conflict component of it, which is pretty important. It's about the human being, the individual, becoming too reliant on what that worldview wants from them, right? So the idea here is well, what does it mean to be a good Christian? What does it mean to be a good Jew or a good Muslim? What does it mean to be a good conservative Republican or a good liberal Democrat? Or what does it mean to be a good American as opposed to a good German? Whatever it is, you're going to have some, literally that's, again, back to why religions are such a great prototype of what a cultural worldview is, because they often, like I was raised as a Roman Catholic, they come literally with rules, expectations, commandments. You must do this, you must not do that. And even though most of them, I think we agree are good, right? Don't kill, don't whatever. There are more than that. Don't kill and don't whatever. But you get my point. The argument here is that the only way you can start extracting that meaning to feel as if you have value and esteem, if you're relying solely on a cultural worldview to get it, is to look up to those doctrines, those obligations, and say, okay, tell me who I'm supposed to be today. Tell me what I'm supposed to think today. How am I supposed to react in this given situation? And the danger here is if this is the mode of how you're getting through your existential reality, is you can see what happens is you start becoming inherently obligated and controlled by these external duties, these rules, these expectations from outside, right? They're not necessarily intrinsic. They're not coming from you all the time. Now, you may adopt them and you may think some of them are fit. There's an overlap. We don't choose completely unrelated worldviews. We buy into them. But sooner or later, we are going to be confronted with an expectation from a worldview that doesn't make sense. Now, an example I give is, oftentimes when I would lecture on this, is you can imagine a situation where someone might have adopted a religious, political, cultural ideology that says homosexuality is bad. And they buy into that, and that's part of the worldview, and that's their new reality, and they live by that, among other things. And then one day, that person's daughter or son is going to come up to them and say, Mom, Dad, I'm gay. And now what does that person do? Because suddenly they are confronted with, well, now wait a second, I know what it is that my worldview says I'm supposed to think about this, or say about this, or feel about this. But perhaps there's a conflict because suddenly, I don't want to disparage or dismiss the child that I love. So even just in that very simple example, I hope you can see that eventually even people, the worldviews we hold, the worldviews we choose make sense a lot of the time for us, right? That's why we choose them. But they're not always going to be perfect, and inevitably we are going to be in a position where we have to make a determination. Is this external sort of system of rules and obligations and expectations fitting with me right now? And remember, all of this is simply because we fear death, deny death, don't want to confront death, and don't want to lean into it and integrate it into our lives. We're all too afraid, and it's all serving that purpose of keeping us feeling meaningful and valued, so we're not curled up in the corner in a ball of tears. Now, what I did when I started my career in the early 2000s was first of all, I read all this and I thought it was brilliant. But I also read a lot of research into people who have what we call near-death experiences, and we're going to talk about that in future episodes because it's what I do now in my research at the University of Virginia. And so people who have either clinically died or come very close to death and have had these classic experiences, no doubt you've heard of, like, you know, leaving their body, going through a tunnel, seeing the light, etc., etc. So a classic near-death experience. Also people who have just come close to death without having that kind of traditional near-death experience, but nearly died. People who have gone through horrible experiences, traumatic, and experience what we call post-traumatic growth. Also people who are terminally ill, facing the end of their lives, much like the people who my neighbor Becky works with. Hospice workers, right? These people are working with people daily who are near the end of their lives. They're terminal. And what you see from this research is that these individuals, for them, death isn't a concept anymore, right? It's not just some scary abstract idea that's like, boo, you're going to die someday. Now run and embrace your worldview. These are people who have faced death, either literally, potentially, from a near-death experience, or virtually were convinced I am dying in this moment and then somehow didn't. And what you discover in a lot of these cases is over time you don't see what terror management theory predicts. You don't see defense of a worldview that they held and threats from people who hold other worldviews. What you see is people letting go of their worldviews a bit. They grasp a little bit less tightly to them. They're more inclusive. If someone comes along and says, hey, I have a different religion, they're thinking, hey, you know, cool. We're all on the same path. We're all trying to find our way. Good for you. That's like a caricature, but it's true. Massive change for these people too. Don't get it wrong. There's trauma, not just from the physiological trauma of whatever it was that nearly killed them. Oftentimes it leads to divorce. People realize they're in relationships that aren't satisfying. They quit jobs. They re-educate themselves to start into a new career because they feel like, what am I doing with my life? This job, this career brings me no meaning or value or joy, and they pursue oftentimes careers that give back, teaching, social work, etc. And I saw all that and I said, okay, so here's the deal. Terror management theory keeps death, when it does all of its research, it keeps death as a concept. It just says, hey, think about death, boo. And that's scary? Yeah, now look at what people do. They grab onto their pre-existing worldviews and they defend them when someone threatens them. Great. It's cool. It's what we do. I have no qualm with that. The research shows it. But people who face death, this is the thing, the near-death experiencers, the post-traumatic growth folks, death is integrated into their lives. It's now just something that they understand is inherently a part of being alive. That's part of who we are. We are mortal beings. And if we deny that, we're denying a part of who we are. And if you want to fully live, they tell us, you have to embrace the fact that you will someday fully die. And that's what I basically brought to psychology, is a model and an experimental approach that showed that you can get people to think about death in a way that makes them a little bit more inclusive, a little bit less defensive, a little bit more willing to live fully rather than live in denial and in a biased manner, looking for threats that makes their worldview seem less meaningful, and in a sense makes them seem less meaningful. We have meaning inherently in us. We can find meaning. Doesn't mean you can't. Religion is great, culture is great, all kinds of worldviews are great. Being a good family member, being a good father, whatever it is, it's awesome. But if it's the only way or the majority of the way that you are extracting meaning in your life, it will inevitably leave you unsatisfied. Meaning is internal. Meaning is something we find in us, and then we have to enact from within. And if all you're doing is looking for external validation, external expectation to guide you, you will inevitably be left unsatisfied. And that's what the bulk of my research shows me, and that's why I don't think I'm crazy, Becky. I really don't. I think I'm living fully. That's what I think. And for me, this is how. For others, it's something else. It's jumping out of an airplane. Maybe it's, I don't want to come up with many more examples because it's for whatever it is for you. I hope you're doing it. I hope you find it, because it's important that you do. It's important that we find whatever it is that makes us feel alive. Ernest Becker once wrote that it is, I'm paraphrasing here, that being alive inevitably makes us aware that we'll die, and the only way to really deal with that is then to be less than fully alive. And my model says, no, you can be fully alive. The near-death experiencers tell us you can be fully alive in the light of death. It's okay. I wrote once in a chapter in a book of meaning in life, that I think the best definition of death is the absence of life. But defining life with the absence of death utterly fails to capture all the mystery of living. And if you put it that way, it turns out that life is the mystery, not death. Because death is a certain thing, but whether you live fully or not, that's not certain. And that is intrinsically yours to make happen. That is for you to decide, in conjunction with your culture, in conjunction with your family, in conjunction with your religion, all your cultural worldviews. They don't go away. They just don't dominate you. So I'm going to leave there. I hope that maybe you'll check out some of my work. You feel free to do so, or go to Wikipedia, do your own sort of searching for terror management theory. My model is called the dual existential systems theory. I know it's very academic sounding, but I'm an academic. I hope you don't let the fear of death control you. I hope you find a way to live your life on your terms. I hope you embrace your reality. Once you do, my model predicts that your life will become more full. It's a quote sometimes I use from Eddie Vedder, singer-songwriter from Pearl Jam. He wrote a song once, and in that song he writes, "I know that I was born and I know that I'll die. The in-between is mine." And I think that's what you need to figure out. You need to own that middle part, the life that you're living. You need to own the two other parts. The fact that you're alive, equally the fact that you will someday be dead. And sometimes as scary as that is to do, the payoff is dramatic. All right, so listen, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for listening and joining me on this morning commute here in Charlottesville. I hope you guys have a great day. Ride your ride. Be safe if you do ride. Be good to each other and be good to yourself. Check you in the next one. I hope to see you then.